Our next speaker makes stories like this possible, simply put. He is the professor of surgery and chief of George Washington Transplant Institute. He has specialties including kidney, liver, and pancreas transplantation, pancreas, islet, and stem cell transplantation, and laparoscopic kidney donation. Please welcome Dr. Keith Melancon.
Good morning. It's always a pleasure for me to be here and speak at this event because I know how important all of you are to what I do. I am a transplant surgeon, and every time I hear a story like the one we just heard, it reminds me of the confederation of the people out there that are alive because of our efforts, because of your efforts. And I think it's important that we always remember that human element. It's kind of funny because I was not supposed to speak to you today. I'm actually pinch hitting for a good friend of mine. And I am honored to actually be able to tell his story because I think it gives a whole new dimension to what we do every day. So the title of my talk is Extended Criteria Kidney Transplantation, but that's not really what I am going to talk to you about, and you will see as the story unfolds. So I always like to start with this animated cartoon because it really encapsulates what we do in transplantation. I don't know, there are, I'm sure, millennials in the crowd, and maybe you don't know about Peanuts, but Charlie Brown, Charles Schultz, this was my favorite cartoon growing up. And in this particular skit, what you have is Linus and Lucy. And Lucy is looking at Linus, and Linus is actually having a conversation with a balloon, a helium-filled balloon. And he's telling the balloon, I'm going to let you go, and you're going to go out and get some exercise, and then you're going to come back to me. And she overhears this conversation and just starts laughing because she thinks that's just the most silliest thing she's ever heard, that he would have a conversation with the balloon and expect the balloon to be obedient. So he lets the balloon go. It flies off into the sky as a balloon caught in the wind would do. And lo and behold, the balloon comes back to him and does exactly as he asked it to do. And she storms off and she says, "I hate balloons and little brothers." And in the field of transplantation, we're Linus, right? We have to let that balloon go and expect something miraculous to happen, like the story you just heard. So that's why I love this animated sketch, because every day I feel like, we are catching lightning in our hands. Now, for all of the art enthusiasts in the audience, you may know that that is, of course, a Rothko. I was recently at a museum, and there's a Rothko room, and I was surrounded by these very, very expensive pieces of art. And to quote Mark Rothko, he said, "We start with color," meaning that all of our emotions can be summed up by different colors. And depending on how we look at that color, it can tell you about what's inside of us. In this very famous poem by T.S. Eliot, Ash Wednesday, he is basically saying, because I do not hope to turn again, because I do not hope to turn, desiring this man's gift and that man's scope. He's saying that it's through introspection that we find our purpose, not through what's out there, not what's reflected back at us, it's what's inside of us. I am from Louisiana. This is a very famous cemetery in New Orleans, Louisiana. If any of you been to New Orleans, you know that New Orleans is below sea level, right? So we have to build these cities above the ground for the dead. And in that way, it's like the dead are never really gone. It's like they're among us. There are these two Swahili terms. One is called Sasha, and the other Zamani. Sasha refers to people who have died, but they are still with us, meaning that anyone that's alive that continues to have memories of that person holds them in our dimension, even though they're gone. The Zumani are still remembered, but they're not remembered by the people that knew them. They are further off in the next dimension. It's obvious to us that work in transplant how important this is, these memories, and how they stay alive. Oftentimes, the organs are actually alive long after that person is gone. When I left Louisiana, I went to Hopkins. It was actually the best time academically in my life. I learned more in that time than I did at any other time in my life. And this statue, if you've ever been to Hopkins, the statue of Jesus is at the center of the old hospital. On the right foot, his toe is worn down because so many people would touch and pray at that statue by touching his toe. I would touch that toe every day I walked into that building. I was brought to Hopkins by this man, Bob Montgomery, my mentor, my friend. You may have read about Dr. Montgomery because he's a very famous transplant surgeon. And his story is a remarkable story. He has a congenital heart problem that he obviously had his entire life. Every male in his family had this problem. And he had a defibrillator, a pacemaker were inserted over the years. And it gave him this idea that life is precious. He became a transplant surgeon and tried to do everything, or tries to do everything in his power to make sure that people can receive these life-sustaining organs. When I was at Hopkins, we were trailblazers in a lot of different areas, and what was most infectious was the fact that Dr. Montgomery never, ever let any obstacle stop him or us from figuring out a way to transplant these impossible to transplant patients. I actually was in his wedding when he married the great Denise Graves. And if any of you are Washingtonians, you know that she is a very famous opera singer. And their union just was the bringing together of these two phenomenal spirits. If you've ever been to the National Portrait Gallery, her portrait stands in the same room where Michelle Obama's portrait is. She is a phenomenal person. He is a phenomenal person. So to fast forward a bit, he is in Italy delivering a talk when he collapses and has to be resuscitated because, in short, his heart was giving out. There were no clues that this was going to happen to him, but he's in Italy, he has to be flown back to the United States, and over the course of the next couple of weeks, his heart stops beating on 3 occasions. He flatlines. I had dinner with him sometime thereafter, and he explained to me that every single time he flatlined, he had an out-of-body experience. Now, it wasn't like what you may have heard on television or seen before. His out-of-body experience was more like that Rothko painting. It was colors that he came to mind, a feeling of warmth. He felt like he was in a good place. But the third time, the last one that he had, when he came back into his body, he felt like there was a purpose that he was being brought back into our dimension. And I firmly believe that there is a purpose, and I think it's a bit of what we're talking about today. He, over the course of the next year, went through lots of tests and lots of treatments to try to get his heart to work better, but to no avail. His heart was failing. He was going to die if he didn't receive a heart transplant. You may have read the story in the Wall Street Journal, but here, the surgeon now becomes the patient. The team that he had put together at NYU when he left Hopkins, went to NYU, he put a team together, and the surgeons that he hired actually had to do his operation. His heart was failing pretty quickly, so he actually signed up for a new procedure. He signed up to receive a heart transplant from someone that had hepatitis C. He didn't have hepatitis C, but the donor could possibly have hepatitis C. Luckily, or that's the circle of life in transplant. I always tell people the best transplant stories start with a horrible real life story, because good donors tend to be young. Young people shouldn't die. His donor was a 21-year-old gentleman who unfortunately was an IV drug abuser who overdosed on IV drugs. He was hepatitis C positive. So Bob always likes to say, I got the heart of a 21-year-old. The operation went quite well, and he continues to do well over a year after his transplant. But in that year before he was actually transplanted, I told you about the 3 out-of-body experiences. It caused him, Bob was always a great guy, but this experience caused him to see life just a little bit differently. And he started writing these long love letters to his wife, Denise. And she kept all of them. She kept all the letters. She kept all the long emails. And she was compiling it. She didn't understand why until he received his transplant. Once he received his transplant, she took all of the letters, all of the emails, and she gave them to a friend, a composer. And he created an opera from the letters. I actually went to the first performance, and it's, as operas are, it's a very emotional sort of performance. And I can tell you that there was not a dry eye in the house because of the depth of emotion, the emotive force that you can feel in his writing. So I think that's the whole point of what I'm here to talk about, which is we all know what a good donor is, right? Good donors are young, healthy, their organs function well. But we have a problem in this country, we have a problem in this world, we just don't have enough of them. So every single possible opportunity must be explored in order for us to try to make even a dent in the amount of illness that we deal with on a daily basis. There are way too many people on the list to be transplanted. And although we have this argument in transplant all the time about these great donors, standard criteria donors, yeah, that's not the point. The point is we need to be using every possible organ. People that are older, people that have histories that are, in the past we would not have considered to be amenable to transplantation, but now we're finding actually we can utilize those organs and they can work well. So things like age, so we frequently will use organs for people over the age of 60, sometimes even 70, even 80. I've done transplants in donors that were over 80 years of age, and the organs work very well. People will have, at the end of their life, even young donors, their organs will start to dysfunction, but those organs still can be transplanted and work well under the right circumstances. DCD, declared cardiac death, we now do this very routinely, particularly in this OPO, and again, to very good effect. Infectious disease, I just told you the story about hepatitis C, but even HIV, we have a new act that allows for HIV-positive organs to go to other patients that have HIV, and even cancer. I mean, we can sometimes cut cancers off of organs and still transplant them, or the patient could have cancer in another part of their body. So the idea is you should be thinking that more than just the standard criteria, great donor can be utilized and should be utilized. Just for kidney, there are over 120,000 people in this country that are currently on the list for kidney transplantation. We only do about 20,000 per year. Most of the people that are on that list will never be able to receive a transplant. And that's why we need as many donors as possible. One of the things we're doing, like my friend Bob, who received that organ, we have that kind of protocol at GW. On the Eastern Seaboard, there are other hospitals as well. And what we are doing, I'm quoting a paper here, this was in the New England Journal, where this protocol is what we're utilizing at GW pretty much, which is patient will come in for a transplant. I did one 2 days ago, the last one 2 days ago. Patient will come in, we'll start them on the hepatitis C medications right away, bring them to the OR, give them the organ, treat them for a couple of months, and they will never seroconvert. They will never get hepatitis C. So to me, it's not an issue. You know, it used to be very expensive. It used to be over close to $100,000 to treat someone for hepatitis C. And now it's less than $30,000. So the price has come way down, and we can do these transplants to very good outcomes. We utilize organ pumps. Again, this is done because with the new allocation system, we're flying organs from all over the country. So in order to keep them functioning well, we can put them on a pump and keep them alive for a longer period of time, and we can have great outcomes. Utilizing all these technologies is what we need to do to make sure that we have good outcomes, even with these extended criteria organs. You need to be mindful of the fact that just because a patient is older, or they're going to be a declared cardiac death, or if their creatinine is going up, their bilirubin's going up, they can still be good donors, and we should still avail ourselves to the system to make sure that they could be considered. You know, yesterday was Halloween, and exactly 502 years ago to yesterday, Martin Luther nailed his problems to the church door, right? Jay-Z had 99 problems, he had 95 problems, and the church was one. And I think if you summarize what Martin Luther was talking about, he said, you gotta have faith. And I think for what we do, like Linus, you gotta have faith. And that's why I love being associated with you guys. I think what you do is so very important, because every day you're helping to give life. Thank you.